Okay, so you want to own a restaurant? Your name above the door. A menu you designed yourself. Friends and family packed into the dining room on opening night, raising a glass to you. That's the picture in your head, and it's not a bad picture. It's just not the business. Here's the problem. You think the hardest part of running a restaurant is the food. It isn't. Chefs open restaurants and go broke just as often as people who've never cooked a meal in their life. The failure rate gets thrown around so often, it's become a cliché. Somewhere close to 60% of restaurants make it past their first year, and roughly 80% don't see a fifth birthday. Ask most people why, and they'll say bad food, bad location, bad luck. All three happen. None of them are the real story. The real story is that a restaurant is not a food business. It is a labor and logistics operation with a razor blade for a profit margin dressed up in candlelight and a wine list. And once you understand that, everything else about how a restaurant makes money and how it quietly bleeds out starts to make sense. Let's start with the fact that there isn't on a restaurant business. There are several, and each one is a different bet wearing the same apron. At the bottom off ladder sits quick service, the drive-through and counter order format, running on razor-thin, ticket prices butte enormous volume, and heavily dependent on speed. Above that sits fast casual, the builder on bowl and counter dash service, dash with dash real ingredients model, charging $10 to $18 a plate and selling convenience with a slight lie-lavated feel. Above that, casual dining, the full-service sit-down restaurant with table service, a bar, and a menu built around $15 to $30 entrees, the category most people picture when they say restaurant. Then there's fine dining, the tasting menus, and the $80 entrees, where the margin per plate is enormous, but the volume is tinianed, the standards and the costs are unforgiving. And finally, the newer categories, food trucks and ghost kitchens. Delivery-only operations with no dining room at all. Dramatically cheaper to open, but entirely dependent, a razor-thin delivery app cut, and an algorithm you don't control. Each of these is a differentiator to Optimism underlying question. Do you make your money from a huge number of cheap tickets moving fast, or a small number of expensive tickets moving slow? That decision shapes every other number that follows. Now, what does it actually cost to open the doors? This is where the fantasy usually cracks. A full-service restaurant build-out typically runs somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000 for a small to mid-sized space, and for a larger or more ambitious concept, that number can climb past $1 million before a single plate is served. Commercial kitchen equipment alone, the hood system, the walk-in coolers, the ranges, the fryers, the dish pit, runs $100,000 to $300,000. Leasehold improvements, meaning turning a bare shell into a functioning restaurant with the plumbing and electrical a commercial kitchen demands, can add another $100,000 to $200,000, depending on the state of the space you signed for. Then there's the part almost nobody budgets correctly for, the liquor license. In a state like California, a full liquor license purchased on the open market can run anywhere from $12,000 to well over $400,000, depending on the county. Because many states cap the number of licenses issued and force new operators to buy one from someone giving theirs up, in New York, a full license can run $10,000 to $20,000 in fees alone, before factoring in months of processing delays that can leave a restaurant sitting fully built and unable to legal lip a drink. Add furniture, PA systems, initial inventory, marketing for the opening, and a cash reserve to survive Theslo's first few months. And even a modest casual dining restaurant can require $500,000 to $1.5 million just to unlock the front door. That number alone eliminates most people before they've hired a single cook. And here's that trap. Most of that money is now sunk into a leasehold you can't easily resell. Equipment that depreciates the moment it's installed. And a license that only has value if the restaurant is actually operating. Now let's talk about what breaks the budget after opening, because the sticker shock doesn't stop at the build-out. Food cost is first ongoing bleed, and it moves constantly. A well-run restaurant targets food cost. The cost of ingredients is a percentage of the revenue that plate generates, somewhere between 28% and 35%. But that number is a moving target, not a fixed one. Produce prices swing with the season. Beef and seafood prices can jump 20% or more in a matter of weeks, with almost no warning. And a restaurant that priced its menu around last year's cost is suddenly losing money on its best-selling dish. Then there's waste, spoilage, overportioning, and simple kitchen error, which industry estimates put at another 4% to 10% of total food purchased, vanishing before it ever reaches a customer's table. Labor is the second bleed, and it's the bigger one. A full-service restaurant typically runs labor cost, wages plus payroll taxes plus benefits, somewhere between 28% and 35% of revenue as well. Add food cost and labor costs together, and you get what the industry calls prime cost. And the number most operators live by is 60%. Cross 65%, and a restaurant is almost mathematically guaranteed to struggle. And labor isn't just expensive, it's unstable. Restaurant industry turnover regularly runs above 70% a year, meaning the average restart is functionally rehiring most of its staff every 12 months. And every departure costs real money in training, lost productivity. And the mistakes a brand new server makes during their first few shaky weeks on Thefler. Add insurance. Both general liability and the workers' comp rates that run unusually high for a kitchen environment full of knives, fryers, and slippery floors. Add the point of sale and reservation software subscriptions that can run $500 to $2,000 a month once every module is switched on. Add the health inspections thiepest, control contracts, the grease trap servicing nobody thinks about until it backs up. None of these show up on a menu. All of them show up on the bank statement. So, if food and labor alone eat 60% of revenue, and rent typicalities another 6% to 10%, and utilities, insurance, and software eat several more points on top of that, where is the actual profit supposed to come from? This is the part almost nobody outside the industry understands, and it's the single most important idea in this entire business. It's the bar. A full-service restaurant with a real bar program makes the overwhelming majority of its profit not from the food, but from the alcohol. Food cost percentage, remember, sits around 28% to 35%, meaning a $20 entree might cost the restaurant $6 or $7 in raw ingredients. A well-poured cocktail, by contrast, often carries a cost of goods around 15% to 20%. A $14 cocktail might cost the restaurant $2 to $3 to make. Wine is even more forgiving, frequently marked up 200% to 300% over wholesale cost. A bottle the restaurant paid $15 for might sell for $50 or $60 on the list. This is why so many restaurants that look like they're selling dinner are actually running a beverage business with a kitchen-attached head to justify the seating. It's also why the restaurants without a liquor license, the ones serving soda and iced tea alongside $18 entrees, are fighting with one hand tied behind their back before the first ticket is even printed. The kitchen brings people in the door. The bar is where the restaurant actually survives. This single fact explains almost every design decision in a well-run dining room. The happy hour pricing, designed to fill seats during dead hours, the wine list markups, the way a host seats you near the bar on a slow Tuesday. None of it is decoration. It's margin management. But even understanding the bar math doesn't make this business safe, and the failure list proves it. Look at what happened to Bertucci's, a casual Italian chain with over 90 locations at its peak. That filed for bankruptcy twice within a 5-year span. Weighed down by long-term leases signed during better Eurostat, became a fixed anchor the moment sales softened. Or Ruby Tuesday, unseparating well over 800 locations. That filed for Chapter 11 in 2020 and closed hundreds of restaurants as rising food and labor co-escalated with a casual dining category that was steadily losing customers to fast casual. Competitors offer an similar quality meal at a lower price and a faster table turn. Neither chain failed Becca's, people stopped wanting to eat out. They failed because the fixed costs, decades-long leases, debt service, corporate overhead, kept climbing while the razor-thin operating margin underneath it all had almost no room to absorb the pressure a restaurant with a packed dining room every Friday night can still be one bad lease renewal away from insolvency, because a full parking lot tells you nothing about whether the math behind it can hold. So how does a restaurant actually make money in plain mechanical terms? The core engine comes down to prime cost and covers. If a restaurant is running food cost at 30% and labor at 30%, that's 60% of every dollar of revenue gone before rent, utilities, insurance, or a single dollar of profit is even considered. Add roughly 8% for rent and another 10% to 12% for everything else: insurance, software, marketing, repairs. And a well-run full-service restaurant is typically left with somewhere between 3% and 9% as actual net profit margin. Read that again? On a good day in a well-managed restaurant, the owner keeps somewhere around a nickel out of every dollar that crosses the counter. That's why covers, the number of guests served per seat per night, matters so much. A restaurant with 100 seats that turns each table 1.5 times on a slow Tuesday is a very different business than the same restaurant turning each table 3 times on a Saturday. Fixed costs, rent, base staffing, insurance, don't shrink on the slow night. They're identical whether the dining room is empty or full, which means the restaurant's entire annual serve of all depends on enough high-volume nights to subsidize the quiet ones. Now, let's put this together across a full year, because this is where the two very different versions of this business reveal themselves. In the optimistic scenario, you've locked in a fair lease, kept food costs disciplined around 29%, kept turnover manageable, and built a bar program that pulls real weight. Under those conditions, a mid-size full-service restaurant doing roughly $1.5 million in annual revenue can land a net profit margin around 8% to 10%, translating to an owner take-home somewhere between $120,000 and $150,000 a year, a genuinely solid outcome after the years of 60-hour weeks it usually takes to get there. In the realistic scenario, 2 or 3 ordinary things go wrong at once. Beef and produce prices spike 15% over the winter. A key line cook and 2 servers quit within the same month for single vert and a costly rehire and retrain cycle. The landlord declines to renegotiate the lease at renewal and rent climbs 12%. None of these are dramatic events. They're the normal risks of this exact business. Under thousand conditions, that same $1.5 million restaurant can slide from an 8% margin into break-even, or into an outright loss during a slow season, even while the dining room still looks reasonably full most Friday nights. The difference between those two outcomes in a single mid-size restaurant can be well over $150,000 in a single year. And almost none of that swing shows up as one dramatic visible event. No fire, no scandal, just a slightly higher food cost, a slightly heavier labor bill, and a rent increase compounding quietly month after month until the number at the bottom of the spreadsheet looks nothing like the plan on opening night. So if you do decide to open a restaurant, remember the one thing that actually determines whether you survive. It was never really about how good the food is. Plenty of restaurants with mediocre food make money. Plenty of restaurants with genuinely great food gounder within 2 years. It's about whether you can run food cost, labor cost, and rent tightly enough and build a now margin into the bar to survive on the nights the dining room isn't full, because those nights are most off calendar and they always will be.